They sold everything, said goodbye to their children, and waited for the sky to open. October 22nd, 1844. Thousands of Americans stood on hilltops, in barns, in silence, wearing white robes, eyes locked on the horizon. They weren't protesting. They weren't praying for a miracle. They were waiting to die. Because one man, a farmer, had done the math, and according to him, the world was about to end. His name was William Miller, and he was wrong. But here's the thing. William Miller wasn't crazy. He wasn't a street preacher. He didn't speak in tongues or claim visions. He was a veteran, a farmer, a man who'd fought at Plattsburgh in the War of 1812, who'd seen men torn apart by cannon fire, who came home and asked the question soldiers have asked for centuries. What's the point? So he opened the Bible, not for comfort, for answers, and he found something. A verse in the book of Daniel. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Most people read that and moved on. Miller didn't. He grabbed a calendar, a history book, and he started calculating. He used the day-year principle, a method scholars had used for centuries. One prophetic day equals one literal year. He anchored the timeline to 457 BC, the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, added 2,300 years, and landed on 1844. He double-checked, triple-checked, consulted Jewish feast days, lunar calendars, the Day of Atonement. October 22nd, 1844. He didn't want to be right, but the numbers didn't lie. Miller didn't start a church. He gave a lecture in a small town to a handful of farmers, and they listened because he wasn't emotional. He was methodical. He brought charts, timelines, biblical cross-references, historical proof. To them, it didn't feel like prophecy. It felt like science. Word spread. Not through miracles, through printing presses, pamphlets, newspapers, camp meetings that drew thousands. Joshua Himes became his publicist. Charles Fitch drew prophetic charts that went viral, 1840s viral. And suddenly, across the American frontier, people were asking, what if he's right? They called themselves Millerites, and they weren't fringe. They were school teachers, shopkeepers, mothers, farmers, ordinary people preparing for the end of the world. As October 22nd approached, something shifted. Farmers stopped harvesting. Corn rotted in the fields. Merchants closed their shops. Families forgave decades-old grudges. Some paid off debts. Others gave away everything they owned. Because if Christ was coming, what else mattered? But not everyone believed. Neighbors mocked them. Newspapers ran cartoons. One headline, Ascension robes for sale, slightly used. But the Millerites didn't flinch. They sewed white robes, built platforms on hilltops, climbed trees to be closer to the sky. October 21st passed, then October 22nd. The sun began to set, and they gathered, thousands of them, holding hands, singing hymns, eyes on the horizon, waiting for the trumpet. Midnight came. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. Some started to whisper, maybe at dawn. 3 a.m. A few began to cry. The sun rose, roosters crowed, wagons rolled, children laughed, but heaven didn't come. No trumpet, no clouds parting, no angels, just mourning and the crushing weight of realization. Hiram Edson, one of Miller's followers, later wrote, "Our fondest hopes were blasted, and such a spirit of weeping came over us as I never experienced before. Some collapsed, others screamed. Many just stood there, silent. They had no homes to return to, no savings, no dignity. Neighbors who had mocked them now pitied them. Children were bullied at school, families fractured, believers and skeptics now sleeping in the same house, in silence. But the worst part wasn't the shame. It was the doubt. Because if Miller was wrong, what else was? William Miller didn't run. He didn't blame his followers. He didn't claim a new vision. He stood in front of them and said, "I confess my error. I acknowledge my disappointment." He had believed it, truly, and he never set another date. He returned to his farm, quiet, humbled, broken, but honest. He still believed Christ would return, just not on a schedule he could predict. He died in 1849, still a believer. Even if disappointed, he'd forgiven himself. You'd think that's where the story ends, but it's not, because some of Miller's followers, they didn't give up. They believed the date was right, but the event was wrong. They said, Christ didn't return to earth on October 22nd. He entered a new phase of heavenly judgment, invisible, spiritual, a cosmic event no one could see. And from that reinterpretation came entire denominations, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, Advent Christians. Today they have over 20 million members worldwide, hospitals, schools, universities, global missions. A failed prophecy became the foundation of a movement that never died. William Miller didn't manipulate anyone. He didn't get rich. He didn't build a compound. He didn't ask for power. He studied. He believed. He shared. And people followed because he gave them something rare: certainty. In a world of chaos, war, disease, poverty, Miller offered a date, a moment when it would all make sense, when justice would come, when suffering would end. And that promise? It's magnetic, even when it's wrong, because we still do this, every generation, every decade. We look for patterns, we calculate timelines, we wait for the end, not because we're foolish, but because we're human. On October 22nd, 1844, thousands of people stood on hilltops, clutching Bibles, wearing white robes, believing, truly believing, that they would meet God that night. They didn't, but they believed. And belief, even when shattered, doesn't always die. Sometimes it transforms. Sometimes it deepens. Sometimes it scatters into 1,000 new forms. The world didn't end, but something far more important happened. A man who had convinced thousands he was right stood in front of them and said he was wrong. He did what false prophets never do. He clarified. He repented. He separated his faith in God from his failure to interpret God. Because the danger was never certainty. The danger was tying your worth to being believed. And when a man can no longer admit he is wrong, he stops serving God and starts serving his own reputation. That is how false prophets are made. And that is why William Miller wasn't one.